and welcome to Above the Fold podcast. I'm your host today, Jeff Elkins. With me, I have reporter JaNae Williams. How are you doing today, JaNae?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I was reading your article about in May, Colorado signed a bill into law capping the price for insulin with patients with insurance. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the state of Colorado, they tend to be pretty progressive with their health care and the reforms that they do there. And so they decided to pass a bill that would cap the cost of insulin at $100 for anyone who had insurance. And if you're diabetic or you know anyone who's diabetic, you know that that's a huge deal because even with insurance, insulin can sometimes cost upward of $200 to $300 a month. With insurance. Without it, it's even more expensive. This bill specifically was for people who had insurance, though. So, and so $100 a month is definitely a lot more feasible than hundreds of dollars a month. I've even heard of some people who have the lower end healthcare and health insurance paying thousands of dollars a month. So to cap it at $100 definitely can make a huge difference in a lot of people's well-being and ability to just live day to day. So
absolutely. So the people that don't live in Colorado that are dealing with the inflated cost of this medication, they're resorting to some drastic measures to make their prescriptions last. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's a term used in the industry called rationing. And so what that means is that a diabetic patient will get their prescription for a month and then they won't take the prescribed amount. They'll take less than what's prescribed and less than what they really need to get by. And they do that to stretch out the amount of time between having to fill prescriptions. I've read multiple stories on this and unfortunately several people have died because of doing this. One that I remember reading in particular, the young man was paying $1,300 a month for his insurance, and he just couldn't afford his rent or anything else if he were to go every month to get his insurance. Wow. So he would get a 1 month supply and try to make it stretch for 2 to 3 months. Unfortunately, the rest of his family didn't know he was doing this because he didn't want to have to ask for help. And so he ended up dying because of the negative and adverse things that happen when you don't take your medicine the way that you're supposed to. And I remember reading a quote from his mother where she essentially just said that if they had known, they would have done everything they could have to help him be able to afford his medication. So it leads to people doing some pretty drastic things just to try to get by and be able to take care of themselves.
So what are physicians saying about the rising cost of this medication?
So the physician that I spoke to in this story, Dr. Kale, he works in here in Oklahoma. He said that for him, he sees it regularly. He sees a lot of people come into his office and they just can't afford it. And they just can't afford the way that the current healthcare structure in general in the United States is set up. So he believes that there's a lot that the government can do to help. Like what has happened in Colorado with the passing of the bill, but he also thinks that there's a lot the government can do to help regarding the way insurance is structured and the way that people are provided health care. He uses what's called it's a direct care model. So instead of using insurance, his patients come in and they pay a set amount per month and they can come see him as many times as they need to. And then within his office, anything that he can get generically, he makes sure that his patients have access to it for about $5. So he tries to do as much as he can to help people with their prescriptions. When he refers out other drugs that he can't keep in office, he tries to always make sure that there's a generic option so that he can help people get access to healthcare for as little money as possible so that they can afford to take care of themselves without having to make the decision between getting groceries for their family and getting the medication that they need to live.
For sure, absolutely. So we've kind of talked about how that situation is unfolding abroad. How have other countries dealt with insulin? Is there inflation of their medication as well, or?
That's actually one of the craziest things. So the U.S., by so many people's standards, is considered one of the top countries in the world, but we lack severely in the way that we handle pricing on medication. In Europe, in Canada, in Mexico, almost every other developed country has some kind of board that looks at medication pricing and puts a cap on it and doesn't allow pharmaceutical companies to go in and continue to price gouge people. In the specific instance of insulin, I found that people are able to go to Mexico or Canada and get insulin for about $50 a vial, whereas in the United States they're paying $300 or more for that same vial. So it's just it's the pharmaceutical companies not having any kind of regulations put on them here, and that force them to actually make things affordable for people.
Wow. Okay, so how about the fight here for an insulin price cap? How's that happening here in Oklahoma?
So in Oklahoma, we actually Representative Forrest Bennett out of OKC did propose a bill, and it didn't make it through the first time, but he and several other members of the Oklahoma congressional body have said that they're going to come together and continue to fight for it. I know Kendra Horn has been in that fight. She's also, and she's, taking it to a national level. She's saying, hey, the Oklahomans that I'm talking to want the same kind of thing on a national level so that everybody can afford their medication. It shouldn't just be state to state. We should go ahead and do something for the entire country, because there's people here in Oklahoma that are dealing with this, but there's people in Texas, there's people in Arkansas, there's people everywhere that just can't afford their medication. And so we do have a lot of congressional leaders that are trying very hard to fix this. Unfortunately, Big Pharma is always going to be the pink elephant in the room that is sitting back like, oh, but you can't take away our, ability to make money. And it's one of those things where with a privatized healthcare system, we're always going to have that. So a lot of them, that's where the push comes to not only, like I said, pass regulations that'll fix this and that'll put caps on the pharmaceutical industries, but that'll change the way healthcare is done as a whole.
All right, JaNae. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. That's about all the time we have. If you want to find out more about this issue, be sure and check out the June 18th issue of the Vista. See you next time on Above the Fold.